So at this point of the story, King David was on top of the world and he was ruling Israel in righteousness and justice. However, he soon begins to commit an unforgivable act of sin. So this was a time when kings would march out to war and many of the nations were fighting each other. However, for some reason, King David, he should have joined the battles, but he was staying in his palace, and no one knows why. So probably because he was bored. Maybe he just thought it was a hassle to go out and fight, and instead he was just kind of like meandering, meaning wandering around the palace and not doing anything. So it sounds like he was bored. Everyone, raise your hands if you ever get bored. Raise your hands. Yeah, we all get bored, right? Like whether it's because you have to study for school or you have to do a boring activity like a chore, a house chore, right? So what's a good way to keep ourselves occupied then? If you get bored, what can you do to fight the boredom? Anyone? Raise your hand. What do you do when you're bored, Peyton? How do you not get bored when you're bored?
I don't know.
You don't know, okay. So good ways to fight your boredom. How about study more, study harder. Or keep yourselves busy with godly activities, such as, how about you try volunteering at church? Have you ever thought of that? Try volunteering sometime. Or maybe try just reading the Bible when you're bored, right? So these are all great ways to keep yourselves occupied when you are bored. However, King David, he was not doing any of this. So when this war was happening, he began to get tempted by one of his soldiers' wives, and her name was Bathsheba. And Bathsheba was the wife of one of his very trustworthy soldiers, whose name was Uriah. And he committed an unforgivable act of sin, which was he had an affair. Does anyone know what an affair is? Good. So he basically slept with the wife of his soldier Uriah. He slept with her. Oh no. And then what's even more shocking was she became pregnant with David's child. Wow. And Uriah, of course, had no idea. And at this point, David already knew that he committed an unforgivable act of sin. And he started panicking. He's like, what can I do to cover this up? And plan A was he wanted Uriah to come back from the war, from the battle, back to the palace. And he wanted Uriah to stay with his wife again. And that way people would think, oh, maybe they just had a child together. And she didn't have a child with somebody else. However, since Uriah was such a loyal soldier, even when they told him to come back to the palace, he was sleeping in front of the palace. He didn't go inside. So at this point, King David became more annoyed, and he's like, oh, so what more acts of sin can I commit? And the next act was maybe I can try to get him drunk, have him drink a lot of wine, drink a lot of beer, and that way maybe he can finally come back into the palace with his wife. But even at that point, Uriah still did not go into the palace because he was loyal to King David. And then his final plan C, King David's plan was, oh, maybe I can have Uriah fight in the very front line of the battle and have all the soldiers pull out at the last minute, and eventually Uriah will die because he was the only one left. And that is exactly what happened. So Uriah died in the war, and King David had his wife all to himself now, Bathsheba. So he thought he got away with this act of sin. However, do you think he got away with it? No, right? So what happened? He had to confront God. And at first, people around the town, they were like, oh my God, somebody slept with Uriah's wife. And King David was like, oh no, who did this? But then God, of course, God knew what King David did. He knew that he committed this unforgivable act of sin. And God told him, because of that, your firstborn child will die. And after that, King David prayed. He pleaded, he asked for forgiveness from God for about 1 week straight. 1 week straight, he did not eat, he did not sleep, and he prayed and prayed. And he was ready to suffer the consequences for committing that sin. However, what did God do? He still took away David's first child. Why? Because he still had to get punished, right? So does God always forgive us? Does he? sometimes, but he teaches us a lesson, right? And then eventually some other greater act might come, which is why their next child was Solomon, who eventually becomes a king. So let me tell you a story. Everyone, when I was in high school, I had a friend whose name was Jay. He was actually the best man at my wedding, so he's still my best friend. And we were actually both very good students at high school. So like we never got in trouble for fighting. We never went to detention or anything. But one day we were just bored of school, right? And he had this very brilliant idea. And he said, James, do you want to skip class? Oh my God, that's unforgivable, right? Kids never skip school, never. However, I was like, that sounds like a cool idea. He's like, yeah, we can go to your house, we can play some games. We're like, okay, let's do it. So then what happened? We decided to sneak out of school during class. And everyone knows who hall monitors are, right? They are people who monitor the entire school. So we tried to sneak past one of the hall monitors when we were heading outside to the parking lot. And we crept by him. And eventually, he saw us. He noticed us. So at that point, we already were committing an act of sin, right? We already had the mindset of skipping class and playing games. And then the hall monitor said, hey, you stop right there. What do you think happened next? Do you think we stopped? You know, there's the fight and flight, right? Fight or flight. We decided to fly away. We decided to run away. And we were so scared. We were like, oh my God. And then there was like a fence. And we tried to jump over the fence because we were so scared for our lives. And of course, the hall monitor, he caught us. He's like, come back down. He grabbed my leg. And then he grabbed our shirts. We went to the principal's office. And at that point, I knew that what we did were such unforgivable acts. So never do that, by the way. And when we were facing the principal said, of course, we're going to call your mom and dad's. And you guys are going to have to come to detention for 1 month. And when my parents found out, of course, they were so mad. And my parents said, you are not going to play games for 2 weeks. So I was ready to accept it. I was like, okay, this was completely our fault. So because of that, we need to fully accept it. Right, everyone? So everyone, when you get bored and you are ever tempted to do something, keep yourselves busy. Keep yourselves busy by reading the Bible, doing church activities, maybe study. And always know that God will eventually forgive you, because many great days happened to me after that, right? Amen.